No sooner had he returned home than he sought help again. Emmanuel Macron called on China to invest, and Europe is truly desperate. Having just concluded his visit to China, Emmanuel Macron didn't rest for 2 days before speaking to the media, stating that China must lend a helping hand and invest more in Europe. He also said that Europe's industry is now at a critical juncture of life and death. If no help comes, it will not be able to hold on any longer. This is not an offhand remark. It hides Europe's real and tangible difficulties behind it. First, let's talk about why Macron is in such a hurry. He poured out his grievances in an interview, saying that Europe's industry is now caught in a squeeze from two sides. On one side, Chinese products are too competitive. Items like electric vehicles and mechanical equipment are both high quality and affordable, and they sell exceptionally well in Europe. On the other side, the United States is engaging in protectionism. For example, the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act specifically lures European enterprises to build factories in the United States and even provide subsidies, siphoning off Europe's capital, technology, and talents. As a result, Europe's own factories can no longer hold on. Some enterprises are restructuring their operations in France, leaving many workers facing unemployment. Some enterprises' electric vehicle factories have to lay off employees and shut down. And even workers taking to the streets to protest have done nothing to help. In the end, Macron also made a comparison, saying that the way Europeans invested in China 25 years ago is how Chinese people should invest in Europe now. The implication of this statement is a plea for China to invest in Europe. Herein lies the question: isn't Europe quite wealthy? Why is it short of investment? Because Europe has some inherent drawbacks. First, costs are high. Europe's labor costs, management costs, energy prices, logistics costs, and so on are all much higher than those in China and Southeast Asia. Factories cannot reduce the cost of production, and the products they sell are more expensive than others. Naturally, no one will buy them. Second, policies are not unified. The 27 EU countries each have their own priorities. For example, Germany's trade volume with China is particularly large. It exceeded $200 billion in 2024, and German enterprises have made considerable profits in China. In contrast, France's trade deficit with China is growing larger, which is why Macron is more anxious than Germany to urge China to buy more European goods and invest more in Europe. Macron always emphasizes Europe's trade deficit, but this is actually inaccurate, as there are many factors on Europe's own side contributing to it. First, Europe restricts the export of high-tech products to China, such as semiconductor equipment and lithography machines. It believes that China should not be allowed to obtain such technologies. However, China originally had a demand for these products. As a result, Europe's own high-tech enterprises have lost China, a huge market. Moreover, the calculation method for some deficits is also incorrect. For instance, only goods are counted while services are excluded. In fact, the EU runs a surplus in trade and services with China, which reached over $3 billion in 2024. Additionally, many products sold back to Europe are actually sold by European enterprises operating in China. Therefore, while it seems that China has a trade surplus, a large portion of the profits are ultimately taken by European enterprises. Finally, European products such as cosmetics, red wine, and olive oil also sell extremely well in China. The situation is by no means what Macron claims, that China barely buys anything from Europe. Furthermore, there is a subtle threat behind Macron's appeal this time. He said that if China does not adjust its investment and import policies, Europe may follow the United States' example in the next few months and impose additional tariffs on Chinese goods. This statement sounds tough, but in reality, it will be very difficult for Europe to actually do so. Why? Because opinions within the EU are divided. Countries like Hungary and Greece have extensive cooperation with China, and they will definitely not agree to impose additional tariffs. More importantly, China is a major market for Europe. If tariffs are increased, European products such as red wine, cosmetics, and automobiles will not be able to enter the Chinese market smoothly, resulting in even greater losses for Europe. Ultimately, this measure may not even work. For example, the EU previously imposed additional tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, yet Chinese electric vehicles still sold well in Europe thanks to their cost-performance ratio. On the contrary, Europe's own electric vehicle factories, burdened by high costs, saw their sales decline further. So where exactly is Europe's way out? For Europe to get out of its predicament, sliggering alone is useless. The proposal put forward by Macron for both sides to lift export restrictions, meaning Europe eases exports of semiconductor equipment and China eases exports of rare earths, is indeed a good direction. Cooperation can also be expanded in other areas. China now has capital in technology. and has always been willing to cooperate with Europe. For example, Chinese enterprises have already invested in building battery factories and photovoltaic power plants in Europe. There are also China Minus Europe Railway Express trains. 60 trains depart for Duisburg, Germany, every week transporting Chinese goods there and bringing European goods back. This has helped Europe smooth its logistics. Another example is the port of Piraeus in Greece. After being invested in and renovated by China, it has now become an important port in the Mediterranean, driving the local economy. Of course, for China, investing in Europe is also an opportunity. It can expand the overseas markets of Chinese enterprises, which is also beneficial to China. One point must be emphasized: at the end, investment must be based on equality. It should neither make Europe feel that China is giving alms, nor involve selling scores later that would make Chinese enterprises suffer losses. For instance, incidents like the one involving ASML of the Netherlands should be avoided. In contrast, China's investment in Hamburg port in Germany and photovoltaic projects in France are good cases. All these were carried out through mutual consultation between the two sides. They not only solved Europe's employment problems, but also allowed both sides to benefit. This is the way to achieve long-term cooperation.